In this session for payroll configuration for Sage Intacct Construction Payroll, we're going to focus on the final configurations we need to do before you get into your testing phase, and that is setting up your projects in payroll and also setting up your employees. This video specifically, we're going to focus just on the project portion. So at this point is really when you're most likely going to want to be at entity level, especially for the initial project setups, depending on your configuration. But when you get into payroll, you definitely want to be into the entity level because we're going to tie it together. Now, before we dive into setting up a project, the one thing that I do want to mention, you want to make sure you do have set up at this point. And usually we set it up before this, but if it's missed, you do want to make sure in payroll, under setup entity, that you have your payroll entities set up at this time. You don't have to be done configuring them, but you do have to have them on the list here. So for example, I have an entity called Timber GC, and that's the entity I'm working in. If you're going to click, your first time, if you don't see any entities in there, you're going to click Create New, and then you're going to have the ability to link it to the entity. Okay, and I'll do it for now. I won't save it because it's going to yell at me. Be careful of your dates, again, for testing. Backdate it so that you don't have to worry about it. I like to do the first of the year. And then you're going to fill out some things like, is this a legal entity? What's your federal tax ID? What kind of employer? Some miscellaneous information, your timesheet start dates. This is where you're going to put in your Atrix ID and things like that. Again, we can come back in to do all this later. I would recommend best practices. Do not fill any journal entry mapping rules in here. We're going to do that at the job level and the employee level. And always check this as yes for what's called chargeable tax classifications. This will basically use the hierarchy to pull your workers' comp code. So basically by saying yes, you're saying, hey, grab it from a cost code override table first. Like if it's this cost code, use this workers' comp. And then basically get it in the employee file last. Okay, so you're going to want that turned on yes. And then down here in entity reporting, before we go live, you're going to want to set up all your different tax IDs. Like if you're paying Missouri state income tax, what is the state tax ID number that relates to it for Atrix? You can come into this at a later time, but just click save. I won't do that now because I already have one. Because we're going to need this entity when we go to actually configure the jobs and the employees in payroll. And if you don't have this set up yet, you're not going to be able to get very far. Okay. So that again is under setup entities. Now, this video, we're going to focus on getting what needs to be set up for the project in payroll. Sometimes, a lot of times when you're testing, you won't realize you don't have this set up yet because the project might be in the projects module, but it hasn't been finished off over in here under payroll jobs. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to take a project from scratch and we're going to set one up. So let's go into the projects module at Timberline GC, and I'm going to hit projects. I'm going to hit the plus button. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about setting up a project here. There's some, watch the deployment, Ask Richard videos on that. But I'm just going to call it 88-888, and we'll call it test project for payroll. Very creative here. Okay, and then typical stuff you're going to fill out on the project would be, the customer, maybe a location if you have multiple locations, and maybe a department, right? So let's say it's operations or commercial, whatever you have here. And as far as payroll goes, that's pretty much all you need at the project level to get started. So I'm just going to hit save here. And if there's any smart rules set up, it'll yell at me there, but I think we're good. We'll wait for it to pop up. And so now I have that project in there. If I type in 88, I can see my project. Now, what's critical, especially when you're getting into the testing phases, is that not only do you need to make sure you have a project set up in the projects module, but you also need to make sure you have cost codes associated with that project, because you'll get into payroll testing and then you'll go to try and put time in and you'll process and you'll get errors that says this cost code doesn't exist. So usually this happens when who's ever leading the charge for configuring projects imports in budgets for the project or cost code lists for the projects. But just check, hey, I'm going to use this project for testing and payroll. Go over to here under this cost code here and click cost codes. If you don't see any, it's probably not going to work in testing for you. So you can see here, I have no cost codes associated with that job. You can quickly come over to here under Create. And I can link these. Now, I'm going to take a step back here because this is what's called the enhanced list. And you may see these throughout the system. And there's one nice feature with the old list that I don't see here. So I'm going to hit turn off enhancements for a second. And now this looks like, what we call the older list. And I'm going to take a step back, and go back to here and try this again. So let's start over. Let's go to projects. And let me go to, I'm going to get rid of this enhanced list as well. The reason I'm doing that is because there is a benefit that they may have taken away from you. So let's see. So over here, I got my project and there's that cost code list. Yes. And so you see this right here, add from catalog. That may be in the enhancement list, but to be safe, you can just turn off the enhancement list for a second and just click add from catalog. What I like about that is if you need to add a bunch at the same time, you can select multiple cost codes here. So you can see here, I can pick and choose which cost codes. So let's just do this. I'm going to use I don't even know what they have for cost codes here. Let me just grab a couple. So let's go ahead and get that out. And let's grab a project manager. Is there a parent? So when you're grabbing these cost codes, just make sure if there's a parent tied to it, that you grab the parent too. Okay. And this is my sample, so I have no idea what they're using here. Let's do mobilization. And then let's click add to project. And then here I can pick my project and say save. And we do want to wait for that so we can see it on the list here. So this is just, obviously you want to make sure. Yeah, it looks like I got some missing stuff for billable items here. Let's take a look. Let's see what it. Oh, we don't have items on these billable options here. So let's see if we can find one that isn't billable. It was false. Let's just grab that one. Okay. So now if I click here and I say done, go back, I probably have some cost codes. So this is important to make sure you have cost codes. Not only that, but even a step further. So inside mobilizations, I want to check and make sure under cost types, I have labor. And so you need to make sure of that as well. And we do. So you can see here they have burden, they have late overtime labor, regular. So you just want to make sure of that. So once the project is set up in the projects module, wherever that comes from, it might come from project managers or already set up in the system, there's one more step that needs to be done. And that can be done from the project setup screen or from within payroll. So if I go into that project, I'm still in the project screen and I click edit, you'll see this payroll tab. Now that's a secured tab. So if someone doesn't have the rights to do this, they won't see it here. So under payroll, I can click construction payroll project setup. And what that does is that takes me into the payroll area that we were in earlier for setting up the project. So you can do that way. The other way to do it is just go directly in payroll under setup, jobs. And in here, if you don't see a job number that you need to do for payroll on this list right here, it means you haven't done it. You haven't set it up for payroll yet. So if you notice, you don't see that 88 job on this list here. So I'm going to click create new, and now I'll be able to link to that job. So if I type in 88, there's that project. Be careful of your effective date, backdate it. And here's where you tie it to that entity. timber GC. And then from here, you may be done. If you only work in one state and the taxes are just going to pre-fill from the employee files, you don't need to fill out taxes. If you're non-union, you don't need to fill out unions. If you don't have any certified tables, you don't need to fill out any certified tables. The one thing, best practice that we do recommend is that those journal entry mappings that we set up in prior sessions, this is where you're telling the system, whenever this job is coded, here's the mapping rule to use. And from prior videos, we're probably going to have a project mapping or a direct mapping. So we're going to say the project mapping. So this is the one critical thing, because this is how it's going to get the general ledger. And you can save and edit as much as you want here. And then if this was a certified project, this is where I would go under prevailing wage and I would grab that certified table. Maybe this is a project that you don't want to show in a certified report. You can say exclude. And then underneath here for taxes, if you are working in multiple states, this would be the taxes for this project, the work state. So let's say you're out of Missouri, but you're working in Illinois. You can come in here and say, here's the taxes. Whenever we're working, this field guy is working on this job, we want to calculate Illinois state income tax, Illinois SUTA, and maybe, looks like I don't have one, maybe workers' comp for Illinois. I have a CA, so we'll pretend that's it. Okay. The system has a reciprocity automatically set up in the system that says if there is SIT, state income tax, as a work state on a project, give the employee that, deduct the employee that state income tax over what's in his employee file. That's automatic. We'll get into some options for not having that when we set up the employee. Now, if you need further reciprocities, reach out to us in Q&A and look on Ask Richard. There's ways to even do the workers' comp. Maybe, workers' comp you want it to pull from the job, but if it's not there, you want it to pull from the employee file. So there's some reciprocities for that. You do not need to set up the federal taxes here. The federal taxes will all be handled under the employee file. This would just be for any overrides or additional that you need to happen based on work state. A lot of people will do the workers' comp here as well. And you can hit save as much as possible. And then if you were union from the last video, this is where you would say which local. So you can say we have a mechanical union and the local is going to be for local 290. And you do have an option where you can say whenever someone's working on this project, it's always this workers' comp code 6225. You could do that here under add tax classification. Typically doesn't happen by job. Typically it's going to be by employee, by cost code, by trade. So you don't usually fill that out there. So let's say this is an Illinois project. There's no unions on it. Save. I mentioned in prior videos, if this is a certified project, you do want to make sure you have reporting properties set up here. Just add an effective date. You can make it 1/1 again. And you don't even have to fill anything out yet. You just have to get that record created. Or when you go to generate a certified report in Atrix, it won't find that job. It looks for this effective date here. Now you can come into here and fill some of these boxes out. A lot of these do pre-fill in on the certified report. Best bet is to kind of fill some out, preview it, see if it filled in or not, and go from there. And while we're here, the last tab, this is a nice little tip and trick here for you. When you get into testing and you're getting some posting errors when you're trying to post payroll to the general ledger, an easy way to see how your mapping is set up instead of going into the mappings is to look at what mappings here on the job, project mapping, go over to this journal entry composite, and this will pull in all of the setup you've done in the mapping so far to date. And right on one screen, you'll be able to see the GL accounts, the debit, the credit. Is there any overrides? You can see we're going to burden here. It's a lot easier to find things from this screen. And so that's what's needed for a live project to be set up. Now, also, during this process, anybody who's getting actual hours entered in as time, even if it's non-job time, if it's office or overhead or shop, you need to set up a project for that. So you're going to need to set up like an overhead job or a shop job, or whatever you need to call it. You call it whatever you want. So you'll notice I already have one set up in here called overhead job, and it's 9999. So you'll see over here in projects, if I type in, I think it's right down here. Let's just type in 999. Okay, so I have an overhead job and it's internal. And if I look at it, it has a customer, but usually you need a customer, but just put your own company there or a fake customer like Sage Timberline GC internal, something like that. Sometimes for these overhead projects, we don't want the department to pre-fill from there. We want it to pre-fill from the employee setup screen. So you can actually elect to leave the department blank here. And then if you do, it'll get the department from the employee file. And again, through testing, we'll figure all that out. And in that setup, sometimes you can create your own cost code. You don't necessarily need to use the standard cost codes. You can create your own cost code for overhead. See how you can do a standard or just a cost code? You might just say all overhead hours. So you can have one cost code called all instead of filling out a million of them. Okay, so you can do that too. So when you're setting up that project, you would also need that set up in payroll too. So you would need setup projects here, or jobs, jobs. And I went and hit that create new for the one down at the bottom here, overhead jobs. And in here, you're still going to list an effective date, entity, and you're still going to list a journal entry mapping rule, but it's probably going to be different. You're going to have, based on our mappings, in our GL mapping sessions we had earlier, we created a mapping called overhead mapping because maybe it goes to a different expense account and not the cost of sales account. It goes to shop labor or overhead labor. That's all defined in this mapping. So now whenever someone's working on the overhead job 999, they're going to have different general ledger rules than if they're working on an actual field job. And then in this case, if it's overhead, typically we want the taxes to pull from the employee setup. We don't fill any taxes out. You may still have union set up here, but you can leave this blank and it'll come from the employee's home local at that time. So typically you're setting up less things down at the bottom here. But now again, because I said overhead mapping, I can go look at the journal entry composite and I can see my rules. And I don't think I set any up for that yet. You would see all your GL accounts for that. That would complete your job setup and get you ready for testing in Sage Payroll Intacct. Only one thing left. That's to set up the employees, and you'll see it in the next video. Talk to you soon.